CityCast from Explocity.
Alivardi Khan, as battle-hardened as he was speechless. He felt Siraj trembled and held the child closer. He closed his eyes and said a silent prayer for the victims of the unprecedented carnage in Delhi. So, you have not come to me for military support and protection. What brings you to me? Enunciated Alivardi Khan slowly, his mind abuzz, furiously calculating the risks to his own territories. Jahapana himself has sent us to you for protection, not for Delhi and its people. They are beyond help by now, said the older man, and his voice broke over the last few words. We carry with us a portion of the imperial Mughal treasury. You are one of the few loyal subedars of the Mughal Empire, Janab, who is being entrusted with this responsibility. Please protect it with all your might. As Nadir Shah has looted everything, including the peacock throne, he pleaded. You and your Jahapana have put my kingdom at risk by coming here. Do you think Nadir Shah does not know by now that a part of the imperial treasury has been secreted away? You ask for protection? I have the marauding Marathas from the southwest to worry about already. And now, thanks to you, the threat of Nadir Shah looms over my territory. Any loyalty I owed to the emperor, I have paid for many times over, much more than that gutless Nawab of Bengal, Sarfaraz Khan, whom he has placed above me. Why should I take this onerous responsibility? Objected Alivardi Khan, always canny, always calculating. It is only a matter of time before you gain control of Bengal, sire. Jahapana is aware of this and has not intervened so far, said the Mughal official laboriously. And now it seems I may not seek the Jahapana's blessings after all. What can I hope to receive from a runaway emperor that I cannot seize for myself? Countered Alivardi Khan. The old man was quiet for a few long and tense seconds. Then he looked at his son and nodded. The young man reached into the depths of his jama. He fished out a dull brocade pouch of the size of his palm and held it out, his palms open in supplication. Janab, our Jahapana sends you the most priceless Nazrana of the Mughal treasury, declared the old man, betraying a hint of stiffness. Is that? Alivardi Khan's voice trailed off. It couldn't be. But surely that was an uncommonly large jewel pouch. Could it be the jewel of jewels? Was the legendary Aasma-i-Noor even real? No one else that he knew of was aware of its existence. Mughal historians, known to be dedicated chroniclers and panegyrists, had waxed eloquent about various notable jewels owned by the emperors, including the Koh-i-Noor and the Darya-i-Noor. But there was no mention of the Aasma-i-Noor anywhere. Alivardi Khan had thought that it did not exist outside of his own father's imagination. His father, Shah Quli Khan, had regaled his two sons with stories about the mythical jewel throughout their childhood. The stories became more embellished and the jewel grew larger with each retelling. What had piqued Alivardi Khan's ghoulish excitement as a young boy was the story of the jewel's curse.
Every once in a while, you read a book, watch a gripping movie or a TV show, and you ask yourself the question, was that a true story? And then you spend hours Googling it. Now, how great would it be if you could not find the answer and not be able to reach any conclusion? I know, we've all been there. As every great storyteller knows, the better you tell a story, the more you make it come to life. Conversely, even if you tell a true story poorly, it won't ring true. Let's meet a great storyteller today. My guest is author Sudipta Sen Gupta. She used to be a top-level marketing executive and she turned academician and author. Her debut novel is titled Aasma-i-Noor. In Persian, it loosely means a sky of light or even a universe of light, depending on how expansive you're feeling today. Aasma-i-Noor is a diamond. It is a rare red diamond that came from the Kollur mine in Golconda. It's the same mine that gave us the Koh-i-Noor, meaning mountain of light, and Darya-i-Noor, meaning a sea of light. All great names, all clearly tributes to total internal refraction. In Sudipta's novel, the history of this diamond is linked to the heart of the events surrounding the rise and fall of Siraj-ud-Dawla and his chief nemesis Robert Clive. And around this time is the last anyone heard of the Aasma-i-Noor, leaving the question, was this whole bloody pivotal point in the history of India caused by the fascination of a few men for one gemstone? Artfully, the story spills into the present day with a couple of treasure hunters in Kolkata digging up clues from history to be able to locate this diamond. At this point, the novel suddenly takes on the rush of a Dan Brown thriller, and I will leave the rest for you to read. As for separating history from historical fiction, I have rarely read this done in so deft a manner, and that too for a debut novelist. Now, it is every debut novelist's aspiration that their debut novel must set the world on fire. If Aasma-i-Noor doesn't do that, it is the fault of the world. That said, I'm privileged and delighted to have Sudipta here as my guest today. Sudipta Sen Gupta, welcome to the Literary City.
Thank you, and the privilege is all mine.
After reading your book, the question I have is, what on earth were you doing in the corporate world?
It's the way life panned out, you know. When I wanted to study history, my middle class parents thought that I would starve to death. So they said, why don't you take up science, which I did. I was an obedient daughter. And after studying physics for graduation, they said, find a career, find a stream, a line that would, make you settled financially. So I did my MBA. And after that, everything followed.
But your fascination for history and academics prevailed, I guess. So what led you to become an author?
I never thought I'd write a book, but I do tell a lot of stories. And if you see my dedication, you'd realize that I tell my daughters a lot of stories. And sometimes my husband leaves his mobile phone and kind of joins in the audience. So when I started telling this story, they got really interested because normally my stories are about morals and what happens to naughty children. So they loved it. And that's when my husband primarily and my elder daughter suggested, why don't you write it down? I was like, no, are you crazy? I can't write a book. He said, try.
That strategy worked well for Lewis Carroll. This is why we have Alice in Wonderland.
Absolutely. And it is just one of my favorite books of all time.
Let's go directly to your book, Aasma-i-Noor. I'm sure the first question people will ask is the diamond real?
You'll have to discover it for yourself. I mean, it is only by the end of the book when you realize whether it did exist or not.
That's true.
But its sister stones, the Koh-i-Noor, definitely exists. We know that it adorns the queen's crown. The Darya-i-Noor exists, and we know that it's among the Persian Shah's jewels locked up in Iran somewhere. So it is definitely possible that the same Kollur mine, in Golconda, which gave the world the Koh-i-Noor and the Darya-i-Noor, has given the world more precious jewels. And the Aasma-i-Noor, according to my story, was the most precious of all. And like all precious jewels, they seem to carry a curse within them, don't they?
With good reason, too. Greed usually invites curses. So why did you write this story?
Actually, my objective was to make history interesting. I mean, if I read passages from history to my children or to an audience, some of them would be interested, but many of them, unfortunately, would not.
Are you talking about high school history textbooks?
Yes.
They're dreadful.
So my objective was to make history interesting. Throw in some spice, a jewel, a treasure hunt, a mystery, mayhem, and murder to, kind of spice it up. But what I'm trying to tell is actually the history of that period. But my objective was to tell an interesting story.
Let's talk about how you depict some of the characters in your book. And you do have some real characters in your book. Let's start with Sirajud-Dowla and Mir Jafar.
Yes.
You didn't depict Sirajud-Dowla as the sociopath that others have made him out to be. Why not?
Yes. Because when I was doing my research, I found that Sirajud-Dowla is the victim of very bad PR of those times. And there were reasons for it. We get our understanding of Siraj as a historical figure from two main sources. One was a set of British historians in the employ of the East India Company. And we can understand that they needed to portray him as a sociopath, as a tyrant, in order to justify their nefarious intentions in acquiring territory in Bengal. They were not here to acquire territory, they were here to trade. So, how would they justify to the British public that they have taken over a province unless they say that we've saved the people from a tyrant, right? So that was one. The second, and because Shirazuddaullah's reign was so short, his own court historians hardly have left us any records. So the records that we have is for the relatively longer reign of Mir Jafar, who's the second big character, and his historians beholden to him or paid by him, had every reason to portray Shiraz in a negative light, because Mir Jafar was called by the people the traitor. His house, and even historians can't wash off or whitewash these things. I mean, folk memory extends up to these hundreds of years, and his house was called Namak Haram Duari,
Traitor's Gate.
Traitor's Gate, right? So, but they did everything they could to portray Shiraz as the villain and Mir Jafar as the savior, uh, who who replaced this particularly bad person, Shirazuddaulah. So both these versions are biased.
Now, a year before, the Battle of Plassey was the Black Hole of Calcutta, which was the justification for the entire thing. You point out that Siraj had little to do with that whole sorry episode. You wrote, he had been horrified by the news. He was a warrior, not a butcher, and could not condone the act. Is there any evidence that he didn't condone this act?
Yes. There was an inquiry into the incident, and one of the survivors, a doctor, was asked to testify to the British courts, and his statements were published in newspapers of that time. And he said Shiraz had no knowledge, and he was actually displeased with the people he left behind in Calcutta at Fort William, where this incident happened. This was not his fault.
Okay, let's do Mir Jafar now, whose name is actually a phrase today. You offer up some complexities of the man. So, how do you view him? Traitor or an advanced whistleblower?
A whistleblower, I think, would be glorifying him a bit too much. Look, he was a weak man, as far as I could understand.
Easily tempted, you're saying.
That's right. Yes, yes. Subject to temptations. So he wanted Lutfi, Shiraz's wife, for himself, and subject to temptation for money and the throne, and easily malleable, right? But was he an out and out villain? Because I don't like to see any character in history in black and white, not even Robert Clive, who, for all us Indians, is a blackguard, right? So I wanted to look at the person, Mir Jafar, and then present his actions in that light. So Mir Jafar was manipulated like nobody's business. And in fact, when he couldn't be manipulated anymore, he was actually sacked as the Nawab of Bengal for quite some time, bringing in his son in law, Mir Qasim, as the ruler, who actually rebelled against the British. And then they realized Mir Jafar was better. So they put him back on the throne. So, the amount of manipulation of Mir Jafar is not funny.
So, obvious villains are not really obvious villains.
Yes, totally.
Now, the structure of your narrative, going back and forth in time, reminds me of how Heat and Dust was structured. Was that an influence?
I have watched Heat and Dust, and it's one of my favorite films. I don't know whether consciously I've been inspired by that.
And the narrative itself, was it flashbacks or was it flash forwards?
Um, a flashback, perhaps, because we are living in the modern day. We have uh, all kinds of tools and resources at our disposal, and whether we are hunting for treasure or not, each of us possibly need to know our history.
Sticking to characters, let's talk about the other important character, Robert Clive. Now, you mentioned that the British vilified Siraj-ud-Dawla, but they also vilified Robert Clive. He had his share of enemies in England, didn't he? And according to his detractors, one of the biggest problems was his opium use. And there have been different views on the subject. What's yours? Was he a junkie?
No, he wasn't a junkie. We must understand that the views of even certified doctors of the time, without uh, proper experimentation or proper lab results, were that opium is a medicine.
Right, they just liberally prescribed opium, didn't they?
Precisely. And whether it was Indian Hakims and Vaids or even Western doctors, Robert Clive believed those doctors. And he suffered terribly from certain diseases. And he used to be in great pain. And it is possible that it was prescribed to him as a pain reliever, and it is possible he used it more than necessary.
Hey, if you like it, overdo it. Now, the guy that administered opium use to him on a daily basis was Clive's butler, Walter Reed. Now, this Walter Reed, notice how I'm making quotation marks with my fingers, is really Walter Reinhard Sombre, isn't he?
Yeah, yeah. So Samru is a very, very interesting character in Indian history, and better authors have written better versions of him. But I found him just fascinating. A European mercenary.
A soldier of fortune.
Oh yes. Uh,
And what made you bring him into the narrative? Is that because he was employed by Mir Qasim?
Yes, he was in the employ of Mir Qasim. He did lose his colleagues, brothers in arms, in the vicious attack by the British on Chandarnagar. Uh, his wife and he are intimately associated with the waning years of the Mughal power, uh, ruling a small district outside Delhi. So he seemed like a logical choice as the one who would go after the much hated Robert Clive.
And that brings us to the end of Robert Clive. Now, the accepted version is that Clive committed suicide in England, but circumstantial evidence and a whole lot of theory points to the fact that he might have been murdered. Assuming it was murder, how come Scotland Yard did nothing about it? Would they have just let it go, especially when it was Clive of India?
That's really a good question. But honestly, if somebody wanted to kill himself, why would he use a penknife of all things, which is a blunt and rather painful instrument? Number two, till a few minutes ago, he was playing whist with his wife and drinking fine liquor happily. And then he goes up and kills himself in his washroom.
You're saying it doesn't add up.
No, it doesn't add up.
Not the least for Scotland Yard.
No,
So someone somewhere just said, let it go, take your hands off the wheel.
possibly, yes, possibly because if his murder was solved, a lot of other worms would come crawling out. So maybe it was just hushed up.
Walter Reinhardt, soldier of fortune. I mean, he was a free spirit, right? A free agent. Go fight for anyone, move from anywhere to anywhere.
Which was not unusual. I mean, if you read the White Mughals, etc. So the point is that there were a lot of Europeans in India at that time, and not all of them were rulers and governors and what have you. Some of them were in the employ of Indian kings or princes, uh, or even local armies. And Walter Reinhardt was one such person who came to make his fortunes. But I sincerely believe that he had more of a role to play in the history than the passing mention that he gets in our textbooks.
And speaking of little known historical figures, there's Reinhardt's wife, Begum Samru.
Yes, Samru.
What a fascinating woman.
Totally.
Now, I'm not going to say something as trite as your women characters are very strong, because that's a dumb
Yeah.
thing to say. I've not known of
Yes.
any weak women characters in history. But this Begum Samru, she was quite the operator, wasn't she? In
Oh,
in
yes.
her time, she was the equivalent of a pole dancer, wasn't she? And see what happened.
Pretty much. And at the age of 14, she was earning her bread as a courtesan, as a nautch girl. And from there, she becomes a ruler of a kingdom. So, yes, I mean, her meteoric rise was real. And she must have been awesome.
I am surprised by how little people know of her. And what's worse, she lived in Chandni Chowk in Bhagirath Palace. And that was really her palace, except it wasn't called that until much later.
Yes,
Now, Bhagirath Palace is a wholesale electricals market. Now, I've been to Bhagirath
yes,
Palace in the 80s a few times, and the
yes.
only illumination I ever received was to buy light fittings.
Quite literally.
That place is utterly congested. Now, what does it say about us as a people that we would just trash our history?
Yeah, that is sad, because history is not just dates and events, and we kind of in our education system tend to reduce it to that. That it is only highly motivated and highly weird students like me who will go beyond that and read up a lot more to find out. Okay, this chapter really should have spawned five. You know.
Yep, that's been the burden of my song for a few months. So, when did you decide to
Yes.
write this book? In fact, was it an epiphany? Did a bulb from Bhagirath Palace go off in your head?
No, it was boredom. This was when COVID struck and we were all cooped up at home. So I decided that I'll use my time to read and write every day.
And your first novel's journey was the editing Everything You Feared?
Thankfully, I didn't know about the editing. So, like a person who is ignorant of the bumps in the road ahead, I sailed through. But I could have been very sensitive about my output, my child, so to speak.
Then again, I suppose the benefit of coming to this from the corporate world means you understand process and you understand discipline and teamwork.
Yes,
And you understand the mission is important, not the ego.
absolutely.
In your writing, I noticed that there is no ethnicity in your tone. It's a tone without borders.
Thank you. Thank you. I've read a lot of uh, English literature and translated English literature. Gabriel Garcia Marquez is an absolute favorite. The movies that I have been brought up on, James Bond, all of them,
Ah,
25 times.
that's another thing we have in common.
Yeah. So I think it's almost like the world is without boundaries, and it's true. I belong to a land, and I feel affinity for its people, its history, its culture, its language. But I really wanted to share it with a larger group of people than just Bengalis. I mean, I was very afraid that this history, which is largely focused on Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa, would not appeal to anybody outside of even Bengal. So I didn't want my ethnicity to come in and cloud the whole thing.
So, what were your literary influences? What did you read? Tell me the pop stuff that you read.
Can you see my library? This is just a part of it. So there's one shelf dedicated to Agatha Christie.
Ah, that explains the reference to fen violets and buttercups on page 23.
Yes. P.G. Wodehouse is another huge favorite of mine.
But of course he is.
These are my absolute favorites. And then, of course, I've read Sidney Sheldon and blah, blah, a lot of American authors. I even tried reading James Joyce, for example. Really struggled. A lot of Indian authors writing in English I have read. Chitra Banerjee Devakurni, for example, is a great favorite. But every time I'm low, I go back to reading Agatha Christie.
Why not? And now my final question. What's your second book about?
So these two protagonists, Toby and Hashi, who realize that they have a knack for treasure hunting and who, for some time, you don't know whether they are working with each other or against each other, trying to get to the jewel first.
Wait, I'm hearing Indiana Jones.
Oh, yes. Indiana Jones is one of my favorites. And I won't say too much, but if and when it is published, you will read about a character who clearly loves Indiana Jones more than even I do.
Hey, wait, you're not writing about me, are you? And on that note, Sudipta Sen Gupta, thank you so much for being my guest today on The Literary City.
Thank you so much. It's been an honor. And the kind of people you usually interview, I mean, either your standards are dropping or it has been a dream come true for me. I think it's the latter.
That is most charitable of you. Well, after reading your book, I'm the one who's honored. More power to your purpose, Sudipta.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
That was Sudipta Sen Gupta, author of Aasma-i-Noor, and there's a link in the podcast description to where you can buy the book. And I will be back very soon with What's That Word? That fun segment where we look at words and phrases that we use all the time but never stop to think about. Right after this.
Fans of the TV show Mad Men may know the gimlet as Betty Draper's favorite drink, but Betty likely knew it from Raymond Chandler's 1953 novel, The Long Goodbye. It's really easy to make a classy gimlet. Pour in 60 milliliters of Hapusha gin. Add 30 milliliters of lime juice. Shake on ice until well chilled. Garnish with a lime. Then settle back and let that smooth and suave Hapusha do its thing. Hapusha is made from juniper berries from the Himalayas. Juniper berries are hard to get, but it's easy to buy a bottle of Hapusha.
And I'm back with What's That Word? And I'd love to introduce you to my co-host, but she does a better job.
Hello. My name is Pranati, but you can call me P. That's P with an A, not another E.
And hello, P with an A. And what fine thoughts visit you this morning?
Another entertaining interview.
Thank you.
I loved it. I love her.
Yeah, she's great. Well, you should read her book, Aasma-i-Noor. I meant everything that I said about it.
I know you did. That was a glowing endorsement, and I can't wait to read it. But about this diamond, I can't really wait until I read the book either, so I just want to know now. Did that diamond really exist or not?
I can't tell you that. You must buy the book.
Hey, okay, hang on. Sudipta said she's writing a sequel. Does that not mean she's going to say if the diamond is real in this book?
Really? A trick question? You have to do better.
Okay, tell me how.
Read the book.
Okay, I guess that's only fair. But one more question.
Yes.
Robert Clive's death. That's another mystery, isn't it?
Yeah.
So who done it?
Oh, in this case, for real, the butler did it.
What? I bet you waited all your life to use that one.
And you'd win that bet. Opportunities like these.
By the way, what's the etymology of that phrase? Which butler first did what?
Oh, I so love an unplanned and unprepared What's That Word segment.
Except that you've used this phrase a gazillion times. Are you telling me you didn't know what it means?
I do know what it means.
Then dish.
So the expression, the butler did it, is used to describe a stereotypical, a predictable, or even a contrived ending. It is one of the biggest cliches of mystery fiction, after the style of writers like Agatha Christie. You know the scene, right? A baffling murder is in a typical setting, and that is a mansion with a butler in it.
Yeah, but the phrase is used for things other than murder, isn't it?
Yes, definitely. It is used to describe any predictable ending. So here's an example. Now, in a review of a book or a movie, you might say, let's say book, you might say, the book was really interesting until the disappointing "the butler did it" ending. So, right? So the literal use would be if a butler had really done the crime, and then you could say the butler did it, and you have the proof because you were there and saw it, right? But the figurative use would be something like, there was no surprise. It always ends this way. The butler did it. He always does it.
Okay. And the etymology?
Well, the phrase is attributed to author Mary Roberts Reinhardt, who made it like a detective story trope. She was known as the American Agatha Christie. Now, she wrote a novel called The Door, which became quite popular, and that story was about a butler who sets about murdering everyone in the house.
Oh.
And in the public, started to say the butler did it, and then they wound up thinking that phrase was in her book. But the attribution was completely misplaced. The phrase, the butler did it, never appeared in The Door or anything that Mary Reinhardt ever wrote.
So the phrase simply came to be.
Yes, and there have been others similar.
Like?
So in Star Trek, Captain Kirk never once said, "Beam me up, Scotty."
Or anywhere else.
And Shakespeare never wrote, "Hell hath no fury as a woman scorned."
Really?
And James Bond, Sudipta's favorite dude, never said, "Martini, shaken, not stirred."
What?
He did in a later movie, but that was only a shout out to the phrase that had already become famous through misplaced attribution.
So they decided to just make an honest phrase out of it.
That's funny. I guess so. And now we have the butler did it, which figured nowhere in literature.
So did the butler kill Clive?
Read the book.
Okay, fine. I promise.
All right, P with an A, what's that word? Or rather, what else is the word?
Well, today we have a caller from the US.
Really? Is the caller on the line now?
No, but I'm calling her now.
Great, go ahead.
Hi, am I speaking with Kiran Mascarenhas? Ramji, I'd like to introduce you to Kiran Mascarenhas. She's joining us all the way from Seattle.
Cool.
So she's on the show. Hi, Kiran. Welcome to the Literary City.
Hello, P with an A. Hi, Ramji.
Hello, Kiran. So you know P with an A from Reputation?
I am an avid listener of this show. I'm a big fan.
Oh, thank you. And that's why we're crazy about you too.
It was that easy, huh?
What can I tell you? I am an easy and cheap date. So, Kiran, we understand that you have a word that you want to discuss with us today. So, what's that word?
The word is wit.
Is that with or without an H?
The word is wit without an H.
Cool. Okay, you go first. What do you understand of its meaning?
Well, I don't really have them about me right now. It's very early in Seattle. But I know that brevity is its soul.
Mm-hmm.
I have always contended that Amy Schumer is its body then. That's about all I know.
P, do you want to jump in?
Well, I know that it basically has to do with a keen sense of intelligence and also humor.
Yes, that's about the size of it.
Yes, so now that we know the meaning, let's get to the etymology.
Cool. So before I jump in, do you guys have a sense of what the etymology might be?
Does it come from owls? Is that why we think they're so smart? Because they say to wit, to woo? Is that when they're going courting?
James Thurber, I had that whole thing planned to say to you a little later. And look what you've gone and done. Way to step on my punchlines, Kiran.
You can edit it out.
I'm never inviting you to come see my magic show. But back to the magic of words and wit. Wit is a word that has an etymological affinity with the Old English word wizen, to know. And the witan, spelled W-I-T-A-N, is an Anglo-Saxon assembly of wise men.
Does the witchcraft Wiccan have anything to do with it?
Apparently so. Apparently, Wiccan comes from the Scots English word Wicca, which also means wise man.
Interesting, considering the Wicca and Wiccans are so strongly associated with women.
Yeah, personally, I think that men need to be classified into wise men and not wise men. I think it's completely redundant to say wise woman.
You're saying all the right things.
So words with such a general meaning usually tend to apply themselves to so many things. And the word wit is application of intelligence, which is application of any intelligence that we use all the time, unless we're running the government. So while the origin of the word wit always meant knowledge, by 1540 it started to mean the ability to connect ideas and express them in an amusing way. So, to go to Peace Point, humor. And that was characteristic of a person of wit or learning. And since this became a socially desirable thing, I guess too many people jumped on this whole wit business and started to annoy too many other people, which gave rise to the word witling, which meant a person who pretends to wit. And this was by the 17th century. So while they said witling, in present-day America, the equivalent phrase would be wise guy. Are you being a wise guy? Mm-hmm. And then a mere 300 years later, the slang word was wit jar. And wit jar was the old slang for head or skull, because that's where you stored your wit.
I like wit jar. Yeah. I think I'm going to use that.
Oh, yes, you should.
You stored it in her wit jar for future use.
So if you stole ideas from me, you'd be caught with your hand in my wit jar.
Wow. Okay. Interesting image.
Hey, did you guys know that the word wit has a Vedic root?
I sense a witticism coming up.
No, unfortunately not. Well, the root of wit, it also comes from the German wissen and the Dutch wetten and the Danish vide, which they say in PIE, which is Proto-Indo-European languages, has a root in the Sanskrit Veda, which also makes sense, doesn't it? All to do with knowledge.
It's like that Goodness Gracious Me sketch.
Which
if
one?
You're familiar with where a fellow says everything is from India.
Yes, I remember it well.
Question about wit.
Go ahead.
If it just means knowledge, how would you distinguish, if it just means knowledge, how would you distinguish it from things like pedantry? Because there are people who know a lot but are not smart.
I think the answer isn't that what I said about the 17th century usage of whittling, where it's a pretender to wit. So I guess that's your answer.
Yes.
Okay, Kiran, let's do your owls thing now. Why owls?
Because they say to it, to woo.
I've never heard an owl say that.
How often do you talk to owls?
I've never heard of one taking out a pussycat to see either.
Oh,
what?
That poem.
That whole pea green boat thing was a lie? So anyway, in a James Thurber story, two ground moles were scurrying away under cover of darkness at night, but the owl spotted them, of course, because the owl can see in the dark. So astounded were they that they went and told a secretary bird that the owl could spot them in the dark.
I'm laughing at Bharati's face.
I don't know what's a secretary bird.
One that won't send out a Me Too hashtag just because you called her that.
Wow. We can now call them administrative assistant birds. Thank you very much.
Administrative assistant birds. Secretary birds you find in the savannah, they're these wiry birds with a wild plume. You know what? Those birds remind me of that guy that plays drums for Jimmy Fallon.
Oh, yeah. Questlove.
Right. I think let's call this bird Crestlove.
Oh, that was very witty.
Oh, thank you. But to continue, now the secretary bird challenges the owl in the dark and asks, "How many claws am I holding up?" "Two," said the owl. And the owl was right. But unwilling to admit defeat, the secretary bird changes the subject like a right-wing TV host and decides to continue to challenge the owl on matters that have nothing to do with seeing in the dark. So the secretary bird asked the owl, "Can you give me another expression for that is to say or namely?" And the owl replies, "To wit." And the secretary bird presses on and asks, "Why does the lover call on his love?" "To woo," said the owl. To wit, to woo. Get it?
But Randy, the fact that we both thought of this story, does that make us minds or wits? Witlings.
How about Bangaloreans?
Yeah, that's a special category of person.
And finally, a few of the applications of the word wit. For instance, witness. Now, we think of it from crime shows. We think of it as a person who saw something. Actually, it means a person who knows something. And conversely, a person who doesn't know anything is a witless idiot. Now, witless idiot is a redundancy, but that's the way they say it. Anyway, a witless person is one who might not get wit or sarcasm, for instance.
Here's what I used to say: sarcasm is the gap between what I said and what you understood.
That's funny.
Very mean.
And on that note, Kiran and P with an A, keep your wits about you. And thank you so much for being on the show.
Well, this was super fun.
Yeah, this was fun.
Thank you both.
And that's our show. I'd like to thank my guests, Kiran Mascarenhas, Sudipta Sen Gupta, and my co-host, P with an A. Now head over to wherever it is that you listen to podcasts, hit that subscribe button, and never miss an episode of The Literary City. Have a great one, and see you again next Wednesday.